in basically the area of Greece, from Egypt on up to Iraq and into Turkey and around that, in the Middle East, that area. And it's reframed and reorganized. So we have these two phases. The Babylonian astrology, which is part of divination, and the two sets of tablets that are often referred to are the Enuma, Anu, Enlil, and the Mulapin. Okay, these are sets of tablets. You can Google this and read about them. But they etched in their cuneiform notes about things, and they discuss astronomy, astrology, and divination. The Mulapin, for example, has dates of when stars rise and set. It's a very, very early astronomy, which is intertwined with astrology and omens, or divination. Now let me give an example of what I mean by divination. These are the kinds of things that are in these ancient tablets from Mesopotamia. The Enuma, Anu, Enlil, which basically means in the time of Anu and Enlil, two gods. There are 68 tablets that are extant, that are available today, with over 6,500 omens. Not all of them related to the sky. There are other omens, like if a baby is born with 4 fingers, then something, the weather will change or whatever. But most of them are related to the sky. And here's an example. If in the first month, the demon with the gaping mouth, which is, they believe, the constellation Cygnus, rises heliacally, means rises just before the sun, you can see it for the first time of the year. Then for 5 years, in an area called Akkad, at the command of Ira, there will be plague, but it will not affect cattle. So the cows are going to be fine, but everybody else is going to be getting the plague. And Ira, or Ura, however you would say it, is a god of plagues. So this is the kind of stuff that's in these tablets. You see why we call it divination. They're like magical formulas. This will happen. It's usually related to kings, the nobility, or to weather, or typical. And the Mulapin is around 1000 BC, but there's some controversy in time period. And here's an example of an omen from the Mulapin. If Jupiter is bright, then rain and flood. If the yoke, which this fellow James Evans believes a yoke refers to Jupiter again, if the yoke is dim when it comes out, then there will be a late flood that will come. And some of these are, they are what they are, and that's pretty much the English translation of it. So during this time period of over 1,000 years, there are all these omens. There's no zodiac as we know it today. There are 17 or 18 constellations along the ecliptic plane that serve as markers, but there is really no zodiac until about 500 BC. Amazing, isn't it? So, things change. Astrology is born between 500 BC and 200 BC. Astrology as we think of it today. The 12 zodiac signs, the idea of a birth chart, that where the planets are when you were born, and a complex set of rules for interpreting charts appears rather dramatically in a relatively short time period between 500 BC and 200 BC. This is agreed upon by all of the historians, so this is not a controversial theory. And the information about how astrologers do astrology comes largely from Claudius Ptolemy and another fellow named Vettius Valens several hundred years later, around 150 AD. And they have astrology books. They tell you, here's how I interpret a chart, here's how I predict the future. The books by Vettius Valens are very detailed. And here's another thing that may surprise you. The rules in astrology are mind-boggling. We have put in, between our team of programmers, over 70 to 80 years programming the rules of astrology throughout history. I think we're less than a fourth done. The rules go on forever and ever and ever. sets of rules. And you see this already in 150 AD. So here's the deal, and this is really, really mind-boggling. For some reason, around 400 BC, people get together, they take these omens, these like old wives' tales, whatever, these ideas, and they structure a complex set of rules that supposedly describe how humans behave because of the planetary positions. I found all this information shocking because it's not what I intuitively thought happened. But the historians all agree about this sequence. Now, if astrology is born in that time period, in that Hellenistic area around Greece and Egypt and so on, what was going on then? Well, there's some pretty clear stories. You have Pythagoras, I've got the dates up there, followed by Plato, and then Euclid. This is the time of Platonic thinking, pure thought. You know, Euclid becomes one of the most widely read books up until modern times, where he sets out pure thought of geometry, pure ideal mathematical forms, such as straight lines and points and so on, that don't exist in the physical world. The physicist and astronomer Mary Olivia likes to point out that pure mathematics was not really married to the physical world until Kepler's laws of motion around the year 1600. So what's happening back in ancient Greece is not empiricism, you know, scientific methodology, it's more pure thought of mathematics. It's a Platonic approach of direct understanding. You follow me? So you still have this debate where a lot of people in medical sciences tend to be empiricists, and you still have a lot of mathematicians that are more inclined to Platonic thinking, just pure thought, deriving pure ideas through pure logic, without a direct connection to the physical world. But Kepler changed all that by marrying pure thought and mathematics to the physical world, and planets travel in ellipses, which previously was just a pure mathematical geometric concept. So the point is this: you're in this time period where these brilliant mathematicians, Euclid and others, right after Pythagoras, are in love. You know, for Pythagoras this was religious, these pure thoughts. Now we go to college so we can get a better job, right? But I think in those days they were learning math because it was something beautiful, elegant, and divine. So astrology is born at this time of pure thought and not adequate testing of ideas. So they dreamed up paradigms, models for how the relationship of the cosmos related to human beings. They built very complex, intricate, and sophisticated models. What astrology is it's a model built in Hellenistic times from the omens and from the, we'll call it Greek or Hellenistic love of pure thought and mathematics. Not what we were thinking it was, but this is what Pingree and Neugebauer and all of the other historians tell us astrology really is. What's disappointing to me is that for those of us in academia, we need to do our research and have high academic standards. So when we're asked about astrology, if we don't know, we can say we just don't know. But when we do the research, we find out that this is the story. Okay, everybody with me? Interesting, isn't it? Maybe a little bit different than you thought if you haven't studied this, but it's well agreed upon. So, bottom of this thing I said, is astrology a rational construct? Yes. And unlike what we would call a superstition, it's complex and sophisticated. Now, this complexity and intricacy of astrological thought continues right on through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. To give you one example of all the cool things they don't teach us in school, you take a fellow like Jerome Cardan, who was Italian, that's the anglicized version of it, Cardano, was one of the most prominent mathematicians of his time in the early to mid-1500s. So he publishes solutions to cubic and quartic equations. He develops the concept of imaginary numbers. He introduces binomial coefficients in the binomial theorem. He's also an avid astrologer, accused of heresy in 1570 because he computed and published the horoscope of Jesus. This was a no-no. Contrary to what you might think, the Catholic Church was not universally against astrology. In fact, Cardan became an astrologer for the Pope and the Pope's court. The attitude of the Catholic Church to astrology was complex and varied, and was very controversial. Okay? So it's not as simple as we might have been taught that relationship is. So here's Cardan. You read about him in astrology books as an astrologer, you read about him in math books as a mathematician. He was both. The point being this: people who are very sophisticated in their thinking, developing complex ideas, were very interested in these models of astrology, these sophisticated models. Cardan, for example, developed a theory of forecasting known as primary directions. And Kepler developed a slightly different theory, and it has to do with how we measure the diurnal motion of the planets in the sky and how we relate that to the future of a person. Very technical and involved mathematical analysis of the movement, the diurnal movement of the sky, and how it would improve astrological forecasting. So the point is, I don't think calling astrology superstition is accurate. It's not a simple thing like you walk under a ladder and have 7 years of bad luck. Maybe it was like that in Babylonia or Mesopotamia, but once it really developed as we understand it today, it became a sophisticated model. A model that no one has ever shown to work in all of its many variations.